Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. A little introduction on Dr. Shade. Christopher Shade, PhD, is the founder and CEO of Quicksilver Scientific and the driving force behind the development and innovation of its formulations and programs. He is recognized as an expert on mercury and heavy metals detoxification and liposomal and nanoemulsion delivery systems. Dr. Shade has lectured and trained doctors in the United States and internationally for over 10 years on the subject of mercury, heavy metals, and the human detoxification system. His current focus is on the continued development of cutting-edge nutraceutical formulations using liposomal and nanoemulsion delivery technology with a special focus on anti-aging and longevity. So here's Dr. Shade.
Okay, thank you, Mindy. All right. All right, so today, I won't get too deep into the details. It'll be a little bit hard in this amount of time, but there's some things I want to integrate for you today. I mean, everybody talks about immunity these days, so we're going to relate all of these to immunity, but all of these relate to what we're doing in A4M, and that's longevity. And that's because they all relate to just our vital health in general. And so we're going to talk about the overlaps between detoxification, metabolic fitness, and there we'll be talking about AMPK upregulation, and mitochondrial health. And there we'll talk mostly about NAD. You see the NAD wheel there from David Sinclair. And again, bringing it back to how it generates real vital immunity and longevity. So people talk, COVID, immune, we need to have more vitamin D, vitamin A, vitamin C. But at its depth, we need a low toxin load, we need a high metabolic fitness, and we need a lot of mitochondrial power. And so we're going to see it's going to be hard to even pull these things apart, because we're going to talk about detoxification, we're going to talk about cellular levels, systemic levels, drainage, lining up all these pathways. We're going to talk about NRF2. We have that there in the middle because it kind of relates to all these things at different levels. And so it's going to, you're going to want it to be like, oh, okay, there's detox and then there's AMPK, but then we're going to see that detoxification, especially liver health, is totally dependent on AMPK. And we'd like to say, yeah, there's that, there's metabolic fitness, and then there's mitochondrial health, but mitochondrial health is totally dependent on AMPK upregulation. And the things that kill mitochondrial health the most are toxins. And so there's this interdependence of the whole thing, and we'll talk about some product systems for bringing it all together. So first, when we're talking about immune integrity, a lot of that is proper inflammatory response, so that we don't have an inflammatory response where we're sending all the inflammation to the lungs, and toxins do that. So here we have endocrine disruptors that deplete glutathione levels in antigen presenting cells, promote Th2 polarization in mice, leading to exacerbation of airway inflammation. And so in this work here, you'll in this paper, they have this graphic that's basically saying when your glutathione levels aren't high enough and you have some infection in your body, you're going to have a movement of immune cells infiltrating into the lungs, bringing inflammation into the lungs. And in fact, we see that glutathione stops that. And so sometimes that's called a Th2 shift as inflammation becomes less controlled and less targeted at the invasion. Now, on the flip side, we got glutathione and longevity. And each of these, I'm going to talk about AMPK and immune, AMPK and longevity. And so here, glutathione and longevity, one of everybody's favorite things in longevity is telomeres. So telomerase activity is increased by high glutathione. And so this was a challenge on an animal that brought down its glutathione levels, and you see the telomere activity and the glutathione levels go down at the same rate. And if they change the reduced to oxidized ratio of glutathione, this is highly oxidized glutathione, this is highly reduced glutathione, and then you get more telomerase activity. So activation of this core system of reduction and reductases is key to telomerase activity. So many of you, if you've heard me lecture on detoxification, glutathione is essential for linking onto heavy metals, linking onto mold toxins, linking onto chlorinated and brominated hydrocarbons and bringing it out of the body. And we see stresses on the body when the glutathione becomes more and more oxidized. But as we induce things like NRF2 upregulation induces the reductases that give you a higher reduced to oxidized glutathione level, and that's crucial for fibroblast activity. AMPK, so AMPK, the AMP kinase, this is what's activated when you're doing something like a keto diet or when you're just doing carb restriction. All of that is activating this energy switch to mobilize fats, glycogen, increase glucose utilization, to just get more energy that's stored in your body. And of course, that's what we're doing when we're fasting. When we're going into ketosis, we're moving fat and we're turning it into ketones and we're using it throughout the body. Now, when you don't do that, it's not just that you gain weight, you also end up with insulin resistance, you end up with cardiovascular issues, you end up with whole cardiometabolic syndrome. And so AMPK is going against that, but it's also a big balancer of the renin-angiotensin system. And everybody knows that the RAS is what goes haywire when, these days, if you're exposed to COVID. I mean, those are the people who get sick. And so having a balance to that is dependent on having a strong AMPK. And so we'll look at AMPK, our ability to switch. Often people will talk about it as metabolic flexibility, the ability to go from carb burning to fat burning. That kind of instant switch is key to have that kind of strength to balance the angiotensin system. But it's also the way that we get into autophagy, all right? So when we talk about, usually we're talking about lengthening life by having autophagy because we're going in autophagy or self-eating, we are going into the body and we're consuming old dead material and moving it out of the body. When that old dead material builds up, and it's not just whole cells, I mean, it's often fatty deposits that are releasing pro-inflammatory cytokines, it's whole cells that are bad, it's mitochondria that are bad, and then it's mitophagy, again, lipophagy for the fatty deposits, damage to endoplasmic reticulum. These are big membranous organelles that are driving all of the biochemistry in the cell. And they get old, they get worn out, they get beat up, and they get tagged as they're getting beaten up for recycling. But you only recycle them and move them out of the system when you are AMPK activated, mTOR blocked, and activating autophagy. And so to be able to do that quick on the fly, you need that flexibility in your AMPK switch. And so, yeah, we can do that through exercise. We can do that through our dietary intervention, but we'll talk about nutraceuticals that do that as well. But what's this last one? Xenophagy. Xenophagy is degrading microbes so that you can make patterns out of, or read their patterns and create antibodies to them. So often we'll talk about autophagy as the deepest level of detoxification. It's one thing to move the toxins out, but we have to move the damaged tissues out and the damaged organelles. And beyond that, there's accumulations of misfolded proteins. All of these are inflammation generators. All of these are aging you. All of these are moving cells into senescence instead of regenerating them. And of course, we do find autophagy in immunity and inflammation, that autophagy is a key part. Why is it a key part? Because look, just like you're going to take a mitochondria that's tagged and damaged, you're going to put it in something called an autophagosome. It's like a big liposome within a cell, and then it's going to merge with a lysosome, which has got protein degrading enzymes, it's got pro-oxidants, it's got a number of things to burn up that mitochondria. Now, what if you've got a virus or a bacteria or a parasite? Same deal. You're going to encapsulate it in something like an autophagosome. They call it an autolysosome. Once you've mixed with the lysosome, you're going to break down those parts so that you can properly make that stage of immunity, which is creating the antibody responses. And of course, as you might imagine, there are things that block these responses, and certain viruses are very good at blocking these activities. Things like Epstein-Barr, HIV, they will block the formation of the autolysosome. So the stronger we are at batting back and forth in our metabolic regimes and going quickly into AMPK blocking, quickly into ketosis, that means we're going to be able to have a very robust AMPK activity and a robust autophagic activity, which means we'll be more likely to be able to get into these secondary levels of our immune response and less likely to be blocked by viruses that have that kind of activity. And of course, AMPK is also a huge part in activating sirtuins and activating mitochondrial biogenesis. And so these switches that turn on AMPK, and we'll look at ways to do this not just with exercise and caloric supply, but ways to do it very quickly with nutraceuticals, when those are coupled by having the right NAD level to activate sirtuins. And some people conflate this and they think that AMPK activation automatically brings sirtuin activation, but sirtuin activation only comes only comes when you have high enough NAD and a high enough NAD plus to NADH ratio. Now, AMPK activation will switch your NAD plus to NADH ratio, but it might not turn on enough NAD synthesis to get you high enough to activate the sirtuins. But when you have both of those together and you need both activated, then you can have activation of PGC1A, which codes for mitochondrial biogenesis, which they just cut right to the chase and say that is metabolic fitness. Now, mitochondria and immunity. Mitochondria is the central hub of the immune system. I mean, that is awesome. And one of the reasons is because the immune system uses so much ATP. And I forgot to bring one other slide into there. Actually, maybe I do. Oh, I do have it. No, I don't. All right. Mitochondria are making all the ATP. And as ATP go down, you can't do so much anymore. And the immune system uses a lot of ATP. So as a mitochondria can't make ATP, the immune system goes down. And I had a slide that I didn't slide in here on senescence, immunosenescence. And it talks about aging and the death of the immune system. And it is essentially a chronic energy stress, not making enough ATP, and the cells having to switch into different metabolic activities. And their recommendation for addressing this is to change the metabolism so that you increase mitochondrial strength, increase ATP generation. Of course, on the flip side of mitochondria going down, we have the mitochondrial basis of aging, the mitochondrial theory of aging, mitochondrial aging and physical decline. It's well known as we go, as we age, the mitochondria are going downhill. As the mitochondria goes downhill, the whole cardiometabolic fitness goes downhill. And as we just heard from me relating from that paper, then the whole immune system will go downhill. All right, so we have that background. We want to lower toxins because they're immune dysregulators. They're also, we are working on some work on carbotoxicity as another kind of toxin, and the similarity between toxemias and over carbohydrate use. They both bring you to metabolic dysfunction by blocking insulin sensitivity. They also both work on mitochondria and deplete mitochondria. They screw up your NAD-NADH ratio. So getting your toxin load down is a really important thing. And as we talk about that, I'll present to you a system of cellular detoxification linked to systemic detoxification, and we'll talk about the very crucial places that people lose the coupling of the cell and the systemic detoxification, and that's usually happening in the liver where there's blockages to the bile flow. So we'll look at how bile flow is linked intimately, and it can't be unlinked from toxin flow. So when you put that all together, you get a very clear detoxification, and you lower that toxin load that's stressing you. But it's really hard to unlock that from AMPK activation, because in order to lock up all these, well, not to lock up, but to get in place all of these liver pathways, you need AMPK activation. And then we'll go into AMPK activation in relation to liver and fatty liver disease, and further into cardiometabolic issues. And then we'll wrap up talking about NAD and the mitochondria, which is kind of like everybody's favorite subject these days. But when we talk about cellular detoxification, you have to talk not about load. Everybody talked for a long time about toxin load, and the toxin gets load and overwhelms you, and like there's a fixed level at which the toxin load overwhelms you. But all of this is very dynamic, because it's actually we should be talking about resistance to toxins versus susceptibility. And so here we're talking about heavy metal resistance. And this dynamic of your resistance is something that goes up and down. Your resistance can be increased and decreased. And so in this paper, they were looking at resistance to cadmium, mercury, and arsenic, and they found cells that were highly resistant to it. And they could fill a petri dish with this high concentration of mercury, cadmium, or arsenic, and the cells were fine with that because they were pushing away all the time. They were doing the phases of detoxification. They had glutathione, they made a lot of glutathione, they made a lot of the transferase that links glutathione onto the metals, and a lot of activity of the transporters, the MRP transporters that push that glutathione metal conjugate out of the cell. So as long as the cells were pushing away, they could live with all of this metal. But if you went in and you inhibited either the glutathione synthesis, the conjugation, or the transport, all of a sudden the cells died. So it's not that there's a fixed load that kills us, it's when the load exceeds our ability to deal with it. So we always want to be supporting our ability to push all these things out of the cell. And that is the function of a broad and interconnected network called the Chemoprotection system. I always used to call this the Antioxidant-Detoxification Protein Repair SuperSystem because it was a real super big name, but it's really the chemoprotective system. And at the heart of this is the things that everybody thinks are the heroes of the game. The antioxidants, glutathione, lipoic acid, vitamin C and E, this new one on the field, thyroidoxin, and things like CoQ10. And we thought, well, the glutathione is going to quench those free radicals. But really, it does that through the agency of the enzymes that drive these nouns of antioxidants into the verbs of their activities in their individual compartments. So glutathione peroxidase, taking electrons from glutathione to quench a peroxyl radical, and in doing so, then becoming oxidized glutathione. And as oxidized glutathione builds up, we just saw your telomerase activity is going to go down. Different proteins that you might express that are part of a proliferative and strong and vital function will be suppressed because they can't be expressed under this oxidative regime. And so we need glutathione reductase to re-reduce the glutathione and bring it into the central pool of antioxidants. And where does it get the ability to re-reduce that? The hydrides, the electrons to do it, it gets it from the NAD pool and NAD's sister, NADPH. So NAD, we'll talk about it in oxidative metabolism, while NADPH is driving reductive metabolism. And if you don't drive reductive metabolism, well, there's not a lot that you can do. And then we can use glutathione to repair proteins through glutaredoxin or thyroredoxin. And we can use glutathione for detoxification reactions through our transferases or sulfate or UGT, glucuronyl transferase is another transferase, and then going out to the transporters. So this is an interconnected system, and at first you might be thinking, oh my God, there's all these things I got to bring together, but in reality, there's ways to upregulate the whole system together. Now, the system of detoxification orders itself through phases. Phase one is an oxidative, usually oxidative activation of a molecule to make it more reactive. And you want to make it more reactive so that in phase two, you can link on glutathione, sulfate, or glucuronic acid to it and make a conjugate that is recognizable, that's water soluble and recognizable by the transport system. And the transport system is moving from the cell to the blood, blood to the liver, liver to the bile, bile to the GI, or blood to the kidneys through the proximal tubules and into the urinary tract. Now, it's important to have all of these lined up, and it's easy to get them unlined. And say you have phase one overactivated, and phase one is activated through the presence of toxins itself, but you have phase two and three downregulated, and phase two can be downregulated through inflammation. So the most common inflammagen is endotoxin or lipopolysaccharide, something that gets into your blood from leaky gut, from periodontitis, from cavitations and root canals, from UTIs, and this activates inflammation in the body, and it shuts down phase two and phase three. Now, if phase one is active, you're going to take a toxin, you're going to make a a free radical out of it. You're making a more toxic intermediate that needs to be quenched in phase 2, moved to phase 3, and moved out. So it's important to keep all of these activated together and keep them in lockstep, and we do that by controlling inflammatory states in our body. Now, fortunately, we can turn this whole game up all at once through this mechanism called NRF2 upregulation. So if we're in a cell here, this circle here is the nucleus, and NRF2 gets active. Well, NRF2 is usually outside the nucleus, and it's held in place by another protein called KEAP1. Now, if you're hip to this kind of biochemistry, you'll see these SHs and see that those are reduced sulfhydryl groups, just like there is on glutathione. That means that they're going to be very reactive to oxidative stress and to electrophiles. Electrophiles, like mercury is an electrophile. It wants to take electrons away from things, and in doing so, it oxidizes things. And so these enzyme inducers that are electrophiles will switch and oxidize KEAP1. NRF2 will go into the nucleus, and it'll activate all the genes that are related to chemoprotection. And so it'll bring up the antioxidants modulating enzymes, phase 2 and phase 3 enzymes, and some of the molecular chaperones and proteases that lead to detoxification of electrophiles and free radicals and removal of oxidatively damaged proteins. So there's an overlap in what we do in autophagy of removing cellular debris out, and NRF2 where we're activating some things to chemically clear up damaged proteins. Now, what kind of things activate these? Now, there's a lot of cellular stress will activate this, but we can go in and activate it with different phytochemicals. And the main ones are polyphenols and sulfur chemicals. So these kind of compounds, the polyphenols would be like green tea extract, quercetin, luteolin, a little bit from resveratrol and curcumin, but they all have different affinities for this. The sulfur compounds are a little bit stronger. We use lipoic acid. Our lipoic acid specifically upregulates this much more than the S or the alpha form. And then there's the broccoli sprout extract sulforaphane. Very strong as an NRF2 upregulator, but a little bit irritating to people who have CBS gene mutations. And then, of course, we see reactive oxygen species, nitrogen species, and sulfur species. These are damaged cellular elements that are doing this, that are cascading a signal to NRF2 to say, hey, there's oxidative stress here, bring this all up and clean this all up. So when we activate detoxification, that's one of the things we want to do. Now, we want to look also at systemic now and talk about how we line up systemic. So NRF2 is going to activate that cellular level of pushing the toxins out of the cell. Now, how do we keep that all going through the system without getting blocked up? Now, in this diagram, you see this membrane. So if we're up in this cell, we have phase 1, we have phase 2, we've activated a toxin, we've conjugated something onto it. Now it's going to go through the phase 3 baton cascade. And so phase 3 is going to initiate by moving this toxin conjugate through MRP1. This is a transmembrane transporter. It's important to remember that all these transporters that are moving things out are magnesium ATPases, meaning they use magnesium and they use ATP. So you'll need cellular energy and you'll need magnesium. So you move it from the cell out into the blood. Now it's going to move around. It's going to be pulled by another transporter into the liver. Another transporter is going to dump it out of the liver into the bile tract and then into the small intestine and off to the sewage treatment plant. For the kidneys, the same transporters, OATP, organic anion transport peptide, and MRP2. But it's not part of glomerular filtration. It's actually part of the proximal tubules and its active transport in the proximal tubules. All right, so the systemic is moving from cell out into the blood, going through the liver into the GI, or going through the kidneys. Now, yes, all of this happens in the liver too, and in the GI too, but remember, it has to happen in every cell. So we want to connect all of these aspects. And if we zoom down into the very important subset of, the cellular compartment of the liver, it is the hepatocyte, and that's where we're going to see all these doors active. And there's a directionality. We talk about liver directionality, and that directionality is that direction. It is the direction from the blood or the basolateral membrane over to the canalicular membrane, the bile drainage. So normally the OATP would bring either a raw toxin that you just absorbed through your GI or a conjugated toxin. The little starburst is a toxin, the X is a conjugate with it. A conjugated toxin will move all the way over to the transporters, and an unconjugated toxin will go through phase 1. Notice it turns red because it's now a more reactive intermediate, and then phase 2 immediately quenches it as long as phase 2 is upregulated, and then it moves to phase 3. MRP2 dumps that toxin conjugate into the bile. Now it also is dumping bile salts into bile flow, and right next to it is its twin transporter, B-SEP, the bile salt export transporter that only moves bile. One more important transporter here is the MDR, which moves phosphatidylcholine. So phosphatidylcholine, and we talk about phosphatidylcholine for membrane medicine, we talk about it for brain health, but we also talk about it for bile flow, where it is responsible for thinning out the bile flow so it doesn't sludge up, and mixing with the bile so it doesn't dissolve the bile canalicula's. Now that's an important thing. Now PC is being donated all the time from the membranes into the bile flow, so you always need choline for the liver, and better than that is bringing in phosphatidylcholine. So when we talk about delivery systems, and liposomes are made out of phosphatidylcholine, which is always going to be bringing new material to the liver. Now what's going to happen is when you can't dump all this stuff into the liver, all heck is going to break loose. Listen to me, not swearing. It's like the first time in my life. All hell's going to break loose in the hepatocyte, and it's going to get really gnarly. All right, so you got transporters for toxins coming in, you got transporters for bile salts coming in that you have brought from enterohepatic circulation, and then you got two transporters that dump out. Now these are downregulated now because they don't need to be upregulated, and that's our main direction. And this is just all those transporters in the kidney. They're the same transporters, and so they're activated the same way, and they're damaged the same way. And how are they all damaged? They are damaged by inflammation. We've known this for a long time. There's a paper from 1979, The Contribution of Gut-Derived Endotoxins to Liver Injury. And in that, they saw that endotoxin from the intestines, meaning from leaky gut, was impairing detoxification. Now, they didn't know all these pathways and everything, but the thing that it downregulates is phase 2 and phase 3, and it wickedly downregulates phase 3. So now, in an inflammagen-dominated hepatocyte, now everything changes. So we've downregulated phase 2. So everything that goes through phase 1 becomes these red activated, hypertoxic compounds. And phase 3 is all been downregulated into the bile canalicula's, and under really damaging conditions, you actually internalize MRP2 and BSEP into the interior of the hepatocyte and try to dump all the trash out of the hepatocyte and then reinsert them back in. Why is that? Because these are very intricate proteins, are very hard to make, and so they're trying to protect them from damage. Now we're building up all these bile salts, we're building up all this oxidative and toxic stress. What are we going to do? The bile salts are going to dissolve the hepatocyte, so you got to dump them out. So you upregulate MRP3 to move toxins out. You upregulate MRP4 to move bile salts out. You recruit MRP2 from the biocanalicular membrane over to the basolateral membrane. All this as a pressure relief valve to dump, instead of into the bile, dump all that stuff back into the blood. And what's going to happen then? It's going to go to the kidneys. It's going to overwhelm the kidneys. The same situation is going to happen in the kidneys. It's going to go to the brain. It's going to wind up neuroinflammation in the brain, and you're going to get brain fog. You're going to get autonomic dysregulation. If this inflammation hasn't already done it, then the brain is going to jack you into a sympathetic response and further downregulate your inflammation control and your detoxification control. And what else? It's also going to come to the skin. This is one of the ways you know this is happening, is you start getting itching, and then you get rashes as the toxins start to come out to the skin and activate immune reactions to them. So this is what we do not want to do, is have this bat flushing. And what are the things that do it? Well, endotoxin definitely does it, but another big one is estrogen dominant. So estrogen dominant shuts this down. That's why you get this is called intrahepatic cholestasis, and you get intrahepatic cholestasis cholestasis during pregnancy because of the high estrogen load. Now, when people are getting older and they're getting estrogen dominant, or even when they're younger and they're getting estrogen dominant, estrogen is going to block that, but it's also going to exacerbate sympathetic stress by overactivating the glutamate receptors in the brain. Now, the glutamate receptors in the brain are activated by estrogen. What does that do? It makes you anxious and irritable. Now, what's the opposite of that but GABA? And so we need to balance the glutamate GABA situation. What do you do that with? You do it with progesterone. So progesterone metabolites go and they cool you down, they calm you down. That's why estrogen dominance needs more progesterone. But what else does progesterone do? It's a bitter compound that opens up the liver. We use a lot of bitter compounds and PC to open up the liver, but progesterone, when you have a very difficult case, is fantastic for opening liver. So now we're in this situation where everything's not flowing. We blocked the liver, MRTP2 is blocked, all the toxins are shooting back into the blood, the kidneys are blocked, you have a big toxic load, you block kidney, liver, you've got neuroinflammation, the whole thing is a bit of a mess. Now, where does all that inflammagen, the endotoxin, come from? Definitely a lot is from intestinal permeability, but don't forget about chronic infections in the mouth, especially in the periodontal area. Periodontitis is highly associated with heart disease and depression, which are endotoxemia-related inflammatory disorders. So let's talk first about a protocol for reversing some of that toxemia, and then we'll go into AMPK and NAD. And so we have this very simply named push catch liver detox. Push means that we're pushing toxins from the cells and we're pushing them out through the liver with the bile, and catch is then to catch them all with a binder system. So it's a simple core of a system, one that you can give to every patient that walks through your door, and you can do it in short periods or in long periods depending on the depth of their toxemia. So the push involves moving the bile flow. In liver sauce, we'll look at the different programs in it, but you've got bitters, silymarin, phosphatidylcholine for bile flow. You've got inflammation control. So remember, inflammation is blocking phase 2 and phase 3. That means inflammation is contrary to detoxification. So you need to control it. And when you're moving toxins out of the blood, often people have immune reactions to the mast cell activation, Th cell dysregulation, Th2 upregulation. DIM, quercetin, and luteolin control all that. Quercetin and luteolin, known mast cell stabilizers. DIM, people use it for estrogen control, but it's also a Th regulator that's very good, takes you out of Th2, Th17 dominance. And then lipoic acid is the NRF2 upregulator. And then once you've mobilized all that, you catch it with a broad spectrum toxin binder. So I'd like to talk about programs that are stacked into different products. The way that this all works, and we'll talk at the end about delivery systems, but this is called a nanoemulsion. Most people have heard now about liposomes and nanoemulsions, that they're advanced bioavailability, but only if they're made right. And most of what's on the market now, there's liposomal vitamin C, liposomal glutathione, maybe liposomal lipoic acid, like one thing at a time. But we've learned to stack together multiple components and put together multiple particle types into one product so that we can get stacking of effect and get a very dynamic effect on these triggers like AMPK and NRF2. And here we're trying to couple bile flow to upregulation and immune stabilization all in one shot. So we have the bile flow generation from the bitters, myrrh, gentian, dandelion, solidago. These are whole plant extracts, and phosphatidylcholine stimulating the MDR. Then we have the mast cell stabilization and the immunotolerance from quercetin, luteolin, and DIM, and the NRF2 upregulators. Lipoic acid is the anchor man. Silymarin also is, but DIM is a rescue for NRF2 when it's been damaged by mold toxins, and it is also an NRF2 upregulator and a mast cell stabilizer. So ideally, we get something that plays into multiple programs. Silymarin, also known as this great liver thing, stabilizes the transporters in the biocanalicula's when there's a high toxin flow so that they don't give up easily. All right, so there's our bitters. I'm sorry, that was a little quick. Bitters acting on the BSEP and MRP2. Also, with the milk thistle, stabilizing the transporter so that under high toxin load, they don't get internalized. You have PC feeding the MDR, fluidizing the bile, making mixed micelles with the bile salts so that they don't dissolve the biocatalyculus. You see, a lot of the problems in the liver are from buildup of sludge in the bile tree, so you can't move enough bile anymore, and that buildup of bile accumulations will block this transport system as well. And the other thing I love about PC is it's food for the membranes. And if you're any fan of Bruce Lipton and his epigenetics, he says the brain of the cell is not in the nucleus. That's just a repository of the programs. Those are the books you're going to pull out and you're going to say, oh, here's the recipe for making this protein. Then you're going to make the protein. But how do you decide which books to pull out? It's the membranes that are deciding. And often people think that it's just the cellular membrane on the outside. Here we see all the beautiful sensing switch that are doing the cell-to-cell communication and the communication with the extracellular matrix. But when you get into the cell, it's the membranous organelles, the mitochondria, the endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi apparatus that are exchanging signals with the cell membrane and with each other, and then bringing that final signal transduction into the nucleus to decide what programs are available to the system given the resources it has coming from the outside and the integrity of the membrane system and the biochemical system that's on the inside. And all of that is dependent on toxin load, AMPK activation, and mitochondrial health. So here's quercetin, luteolin, well-known mast cell stabilizers. I mentioned DIM. There's a lot of research on DIM shifting you to T-regulatory activity in your immune system, taking a Th2, Th17 dominant inflammatory pattern that you might see in advanced fatty liver going into fibrosis or into colitis and switching it over to a T-regulatory, more forgiving type of dominance. Now that's important not just so they don't react to the toxins that are moving through, but in the highly sick people, they're reacting to all these herbals that you're putting in there as well. So you're immediately stabilizing the system as you mobilize everything. And then we said NRF2 upregulation is the master switch for bringing up all the chemoprotective enzymes all together, and there's our program for doing that. So that's going to throw things out of the cells while the immune pattern is stabilizing the immune system so it doesn't wind up inflammation, and the bioflow generation system is making sure that you move through. So all that's going to move these toxins out of the system, into the bile tree, into the GI, but what about enterohepatic reuptake? That's called enterohepatic recirculation or toxin reuptake. You'll see a lot of that in the mold work, in Richie Shoemaker's work. He's using a lot of cholestyramine several times a day to bind mold toxins, things that are very quickly reabsorbed. Methylmercury, 95% reabsorption. Cadmium, also highly reabsorbed. So we need a full spectrum binder. So we use a blend of things. IMD is our proprietary thiol functionalized silica gel for high affinity binding to mercury, cadmium, arsenic, and pretty good binding to nickel, cadmium, and antimony. So what you need, each one of these binders has a specificity where it has high affinity. So a high specificity means a little bit of binder, a lot of toxin. A low specificity is lots of binder to get a little of toxin. So you got a lot of different toxins out there, so we use a lot of different binders. IMD, charcoal is well known. Zeolite is a very strong clay-based binder. Chitosan is a molecular mimic for Welchol, which is used in the Shoemaker protocols. It's a little less strong than cholestyramine, but with all of these together, you have a very broad spectrum binding, and then you have a high dose of acacia gum and aloe to heal the GI lining. So now when all those toxins come down, you have the binder there to pick it up and keep it going out the door. And all of this comes with a nice manual for how to do titration of dosing. Titration is moving from low doses up to high doses, and those are represented in the levels. Level 1, once a day. Level 2, twice a day. Level 3, 3 times a day. And level 4 is a double dose 3 times a day. Now, that being said, there's a lot of people that just like a flat dosage. And the level 2 was used extensively in this study here from Texas Lifestyle Medicine Institute. Cheng Wan, who often sometimes lectures at A4M. I've seen them at PLMI and IFM. Did this study for us on our system when we were licensing it under a different name. And he took 103 fatty liver patients where they had diagnosed them with, and it was non-alcoholic fatty liver, and they had diagnosed them with both ultrasound and biochemical measures. And they were able to get 82% resolution of fatty liver in 1 to 2 months. That's an outstanding track record. That is really, really quick. We have improvements in the parenchyma in 82%, biliary sludge resolution in 75%, and gallstones. 12 patients with gallstones, 3 had complete elimination. The other 9 all had improvements in size. The biggest one was 1.73 centimeters, went down to 1.14 centimeters on a 32-day follow-up. That was all on level 2, twice-a-day dosing with 1 of 2 IFM-based diets. If you want more on that, we can get that to you. Now, why did that work so well? Now, people always want to say, at least in the old days, they'd say, well, you get the toxins out and everything works well. And now toxins do impede some of the cardiometabolic strength that you need to have a clean liver, but it's really that half of these compounds in here are strong AMPK activators. So with AMPK activation comes mTOR inhibition, autophagy, and benefits to the NAD system. And that is what mobilizes all of your fat out of your liver. So, and once you move the fat out of the liver, then you're not going to have all those inflammatory signals. So what is AMPK? This is the balance between fed and fasting. This is the pendulum that goes back and forth between when you have access to a lot of food and when you don't. And let's just focus down a little bit. When we say fed, that means fed on carbs and large amounts of proteins. That's because insulin and branched chain amino acids are the things that drive mTOR forward. Fat does not. So when you're eating high fat, low carb, you're swinging the pendulum more towards the fasting window. And that is where you want to be for metabolic clarity, for detoxification, for cleaning up all the sludge and renewing the body. And then you want to swing back to the fed to make sure that you're putting on fresh muscle mass. So AMPK kinase is activated by a buildup of AMP. That's either from exercise or it's from caloric restriction, or it can be done through LKB1, liver kinase B1. And that is where nutraceuticals and pharmaceuticals like metformin activate AMPK, and activated AMPK blocks mTOR, which blocks protein synthesis. It activates ULK1, which activates autophagy. It activates PPAR alpha, and from PPAR alpha you get adipose triglyceride lipase, which is activating fatty acid catabolism. It is blocking ACC, which is blocking fatty acid synthesis. So we're switching over to a clean metabolism. And indeed, this has been targeted as an intervention for liver fibrosis, and here we have things that are moving you towards fibrotic liver. Viruses like hepatitis C, fatty liver, either non-alcoholic or alcoholic, biliary obstruction, all that sludge in the liver, or toxins such as carbon tetrachloride, all move you down that pathway. And what brings you back? AMPK activation, adiponectin from fasting, the nutraceuticals, curcumin and anthocyanins, the pharmaceuticals, metformin, fenofibrate, all those are moving you towards AMPK activation. Now, how is that working in your cell? It is moving towards, here we have it moving towards catabolism, and with that, it's increasing cell polarization, meaning it's polarizing the cell membranes. The cell membranes all work and are measured by their polarity, called the membrane potential. And when they get old and tired, they lose that polarity, and the polarity, that membrane potential, cannot drive the enzymatic reactions housed in those membranes. That's why there's so much membrane in your cells, because they catalyze enzymatic reactions. They also lead to tight junction formation. This is in the liver. They're talking about leaky liver. Now that means that it also activates tight junction formation in the GI, cytoskeletal reorganization. So the whole thing is coming to higher integrity and canalicular trafficking. I couldn't make it to A4M. I was picked up at the airport for canalicular trafficking. No, canalicular trafficking is up here. It's the movement of bile across those membranes. So it's anchoring all of the proper activities of the liver. So NRF2 is activating the movement of the toxins. AMPK is reorganizing the liver. And what does that do for us with AMPK activation? Here we have AMPK activation as a target for treating non-alcoholic fatty liver. Evidence from different natural products. Quercetin, alleviating high-fat diet-induced. Now, realize in the mice, they give them carbs and high fat at the same time, and that's not what they're supposed to eat. But implication for autophagy regulation. Here we have psilocybin, restores NAD levels and induces SIRT-AMPK pathway in non-alcoholic fatty liver. And we don't have my favorite title, and that's about non-alcoholic fatty liver being a direct consequence of long-term nutrient oversupply, carb oversupply, which blocks you from ever going into autophagy, and that's what causes non-alcoholic fatty liver. And there's an easy way to get out of it. You should do these type of protocols, and you should couple them to dietary interventions as simple as just intermittent fasting. And here we have in the GI, AMPK activating adherent formation, and AMPK also down-regulating overactive immune responses to food. So we're tightening up the tight junctions, we're calming down that overactive immune function. And of course, AMPK, an emerging target to regulate imbalances in lipid and carbohydrate metabolism to treat cardiometabolic diseases. And so it's all this activation of AMPK is blocking that chronic NF-kappa beta signaling. And that chronic NF-kappa beta signaling is all that cytokine release that's causing all that vascular inflammation. When we block that, we reduce vascular inflammation and all these direct effects of AMPK, where we're activating the sirtuins, we're activating PGC1A, we're activating FOXO, we're activating eNOS. That's all doing these things that are giving us improved vascular function. And of course, you know, they've seen that quercetin and resveratrol, our naturals, can all do this. And the one thing that I want to pick out in here is that they talk about them reversing systemic inflammation, and they talk about things like quercetin and resveratrol being anti-insulin resistance and anti-inflammatory. Now, yeah, they're directly anti-insulin resistance through AMPK activation, but they're not direct anti-inflammatories. You know, if I punch you in the arm or if you break your elbow, you're not going to take resveratrol for the pain. It's that it's blocking that low-grade NF-kappa beta inflammation that's coming out of the adipose tissues. All right, so now let's go into NAD, everybody's favorite subject these days. NAD levels, or NAD, is important for brain, nervous system, liver, vasculature, heart, lymphoid, reproductive, kidney, pancreas, muscle, adipose, all that. And the deficiency of it is responsible for all kinds of pathologies. Now, NAD is most known for mitochondrial function, where it is restoring what's called the nuclear mitochondrial balance, and it is also increasing mitochondrial biogenesis. It's also important. It's core to the redox reactions. Remember, on oxidative metabolism, we're burning our food, and that's NAD+. Reductive metabolism, we're making reduced glutathione. That's NADPH, the reduced ones. So on NAD side, it's oxidized, and when it gets reduced, it stops working. On NADPH side, it's reduced, and when it gets oxidized, it stops working. So that compartmentalization, you need AMPK activation, you need high NAD, and you need NRF2 activated to keep the reduced side reduced. And circadian rhythms, it activates the sirtuins that hold the clock genes so that you're up in the morning and down at night. DNA repair, all the radiation, EMF damage is fixed by NAD. So yes, NAD is cleaving damage from EMF. Of course, NAD goes low and you have problems with all these different things, and a lot of those are cardiometabolic, and some of them are just cell energy, like in your cardiomyocytes. And of course, like all good things, they go down with age. You could put glutathione on this graph and it would look exactly the same thing. So there's NAD going down in the brain, NAD going down in the skin. And when we talk about why it's going down, it's in its recycling and its use. And fact, I don't think we're actually going to have a slide on that, so let me just hit that. So one, there's a block in regeneration of it. NAMPT goes down with age, and so it's not able to regenerate nicotinamide back up to NMN. And the other thing is it's getting sucked out and it's getting used by the gene repair thing, the PARPs, and the CD38s, which repair tight junctions. So that's all sucking down the NAD, turning it into nicotinamide, which then has to be regenerated to nicotinamide mononucleotide and then NAD. And that regeneration of nicotinamide doesn't work when you get old. And what happens when the nicotinamide builds up? It blocks the sirtuins, the PARPs, and the CD38s. So we'll talk about how to interact methylation with NAD to make sure you have a high NAD level and not a buildup of the NAM. And of course, NAD is the cleaner of the genome. It's activating the good ones through sirtuins, and it's actually closing off some of the bad ones. And so it's protecting and stabilizing the epigenetic genome. And as it goes down, you get destabilization or malfunction of your DNA. Now, it's doing most of this through sirtuins, and so we have to know how NAD activates sirtuins. So if this is a protein that needs to get activated, it's got a sirtuin docking area here, and then the acetylated residue. Remember, sirtuins are deacetylases, and we think about things like resveratrol as activating the sirtuins, but only once NAD is there. So here we have an inactive sirtuin because nicotinamide. So once you activate a sirtuin with NAD, what are you left with? Nicotinamide. That's the non-flushing B3. So as you get older, non-flushing B3 is not a good way to take B3 because it blocks your sirtuin. So we need to get the nicotinamide off the sirtuin, then the NAD can go in, activate the sirtuin. But if we have a stack, a sirtuin activating compound, resveratrol, quercetin, EGCG, curcumin, then that can come in and hyperactivate the sirtuin. So that's what we need. We need NAM down, we need NAD up, and we need a sirtuin activated compound. So let's look at some of the products that we use for all this. Now, just back to the AMPK activation, we have something called AMPK charge. So I said you can go through liver kinase B1. There's actually, if you design your supplement right, you will come in through 3 different mechanisms to upregulate AMPK. If you hit all these together, you have a theoretical 1,000-fold upregulation of AMPK activation. So we're coming in with different ones: resveratrol, berberine, quercetin, silymarin from milk thistle, diindolyl methane, and cinnamon. Now these also do other things for us, and we'll look at how they overlap with the liver sauce, but these hit AMPK so hard that we used to call this formula keto before 6 because it would activate you into ketosis in an hour. No doubt, you would take this on an empty stomach in the morning, doesn't matter what you ate the night before, you would have measurable blood ketosis above 0.5 millimolar within 1 to 2 hours because it hits AMPK so quickly, you move all that energy out of your system. So you know that you have a strong AMPK activation. So here's the core of that system minus the cinnamon. Now let's compare that to the liver sauce system. Quercetin, silymarin, diindolyl methane, and then liver sauce has lipoic acid. Lipoic acid, strong NRF2 upregulator, also strong AMPK activator. So we have a lot of core liver activity going on here, and then we've got berberine, which is a bitter. So you're stacking together this liver function and AMPK activation with some bitters. You do have a lot of liver activity with the AMPK charge. Now, liver sauce is more liver dominant, more detox dominant. AMPK charge is more cardiometabolic dominant, but you can do a push catch with AMPK charge and binder. And you'll see when we talk about our quarantine recovery program, we lead people through 3 levels. 1 month where we're doing liver push catch, a 2nd month where we're doing cardiometabolic push catch, and a 3rd month that's just NAD upregulation. So here in our NAD system, we have NAD Gold blended with methyl charge. Oops, I probably shouldn't have that. NAD Gold blended with methyl charge. There is an interdependence of methylation and NAD. This is why a lot of people went on nicotinamide riboside, felt good, then didn't feel good, or just felt worse, because As you build up NAD, you are sucking down methylation. So NR or NMN are both making NAD, and those NAD is then going through the activation of the sirtuins to NAM. Now, NAMPT regenerates NMN, but it is being blocked by inflammatory stressors and aging. So this is resulting in the regular body of a downregulation of NMN and upregulation of NAM. Now, we can supplement with NAD Gold, which is a liposomal NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide with a little TMG. And now, if we keep doing that, though, the NAM is going to block the sirtuins. So we need something to move the NAM out from the sirtuins, and that is methylation. So NAM, as it builds up, is being methylated by SAMe and peed out. Now that's great. So now we've cleared out the NAM, the sirtuins are freed up. We can keep putting in the NMN and keep building NAD, keep activating sirtuins, but then we're going to deplete our SAMe and raise our homocysteine. So we need to come in with methyl charge, targeted B vitamins, B2, trimethylglycine to help direct regeneration of methionine, and then B2, B6, and B12 to turn the folate cycle. So here B2 is a catalyst of MTHFR. So all these, the folate cycle, helping to turn the methionine cycle, helping to move all the NAM, so you can keep driving fresh NAD in through liposomal nicotinamide mononucleotide. Those balanced together, we usually do 2 pumps of NAD Gold to 1 pump of the methyl charge. Now, if you really want to get everything rolling, you're going to have them, and you're going to have to have some sirtuin activators. That can either be from AMPK charge or the one. The one is PQQ, which is very strong AMPK and PGC1A activator with resveratrol and CoQ10, phosphatidylcholine, and adaptogens. Or you could put everything together in NAD Platinum. That's our new all-in-one. It's got the NAD Gold, the liposomal NMN to make the NAD. It's got the methyl charge for the methylation, and it's got resveratrol and quercetin for AMPK and sirtuin activation. And quercetin is also a senolytic. So senolytic cells are old cells that haven't gotten to the end of their life, but have had so much damage inside that they shut down, they stop growing, and they just release inflammatory cytokines. Now, all this works because of bioavailability. Bioavailability is coming to us through our lipid nanoemulsions and our liposomes, both of which, when you do them at a very, very small size, you get very high uptake. This is a graph from National Institute of Standards and Technology looking at size of liposomes inversely correlated to uptake. So these 100 down to 50 nanometer liposomes, the smaller you get, the higher the uptake. Everything we make in our repertoire is from 20 nanometers to a high of 70 nanometers, where you have very, very high and rapid bioavailability. We measure that through laser diffraction sizing and electron microscopy. We're the only company that has those sizes as specifications in the manufacturing, and fortunately it's very visual. When you get other liposomes that look like this, they're either milky white or cloudy, they might have chunks of things. These are all in the 300 to 400 nanometer range. Transparent ones are in the less than 100 nanometer range. That's our CBD at 25 nanometers. And what happens when you get those done? This is CBD uptake in capsules of CBD versus a nanoemulsion. You have a 2-hour time to peak for CBD in the blood, and it's a low peak. The same amount of CBD from the same source in the nanoemulsion, you have an uptake, you have a peak in the blood in as little as 25 minutes. CSU has found that this peak is in as little as 15 minutes. So in 15 to 25 minutes, all these things come in, activate cellular detox, liver detox, dump things into the blood. Half hour after you take liver sauce, you can take your binder. Hour after you take your AMPK charge, you see all of these ketones showing up in your blood because you concentrate all these compounds into a very narrow window. So you get immediacy and you get a higher uptake. So there's a 6-fold increase in total uptake. There's an 8-fold increase in the peak dose. And that's where things happen. We've proven this with glutathione as well versus other products that we've shown not to absorb. And we see with our liposomal NMN, there's a 4.25-fold increase in absorption over powdered NMN. I did want to mention our quarantine recovery program. We take you through a 3-month restore, activate, elevate that's putting you through push catch with some add-ons of glutathione and cat's claw to move out antigen load, then moving to AMPK activation but bringing along detoxification, and then moving to mitochondrial biogenesis. So, and just to mention one thing for acute immediate immune upregulation when you're traveling or if you're under some kind of stress, immune charge are shots with 10,000 IUs D, 2,000 milligrams C, 25,000 IUs A, a milligram of K, 40 milligrams of tocotrienols, and 200 milligrams of elderberry extract. So, kind of a whirlwind there. Slightly. Well, you put in too many slides, Mindy. All right, what are our questions?
All right, first question. Do we typically have enough phosphatidylcholine in the body to support the MDR transporter, or should we be supplementing?
Well, under low stress periods you do, but if you're trying to detoxify, or if you're just trying to keep your cellular health up, then you should be supplementing. PC is one of my go-tos. I don't take it it's always it's always in what I'm taking to some degree, and sometimes I focus and take the pure PC for a couple days at a time.
Okay.
But definitely during a detox.
Okay. Does the binder work locally in the GI tract, or does it also work systemically?
Well, it's working locally in the GI tract, and it's only working on things that are enterohepatically circulating. So, because people worry about binders, oh my God, I'm going to pull down all my minerals, I'm going to pull down all the pharmaceuticals I'm taking, and that is not true. So it's got to come out into the bile and go back in. And one of the interesting things is a lot of the inflammatory cytokines have enterohepatic circulation, and you can lower inflammation with the binders.
Okay. Do we need to have high NAD levels in order to activate AMPK to support liver health?
No, but you need high NAD levels to activate sirtuins, all right? So you can have AMPK activation through fasting and exercise, and you'll get some of the benefits of that, but you won't get all the sirtuin activation until the NAD levels are high enough. It'll help you flip NAD plus to NADH ratios, but as you get older, you need to supplement with the good precursors to bring things up. And just let me mention with the methylation, if you're taking NMN, or if you're taking True Niagen and you're not feeling good or your energy's going down, you need more methylation. Methylation is stabilizing. When your methylation goes down, you have a destabilization of the mast cells. So people start getting inflammatory reactions, and that's why they feel crappy. And then you pour in a bunch of methylation, and then you'll feel better.
Okay. What kind of timing do you recommend regarding the use of AMPK activators and the laying down of lean muscle?
Laying down of lean muscle. All right, so let me just throw a couple things out there because I think they're talking about mTOR forward too.
Yeah.
And so we're doing a lot of that too. So we're going to mTOR block. We want to work out, AMPK activators, work out, do a regimen like that. You could be going days on, days off, or you could go weeks on, weeks off. But then you want to flip over to mTOR forward. Like recently, I jammed myself up with exosomes, and I went mTOR forward. I started taking carbs and protein. I was taking collagen powder, carbs, and HMB, hydroxymethylbutyrate. It's a product called Betator, and that is a metabolite of leucine that is 20 times more potent as an mTOR driver than leucine. So do some time cleaning everything up and then flip over and build out the muscle mass. And so you can put all those together. I don't have my exact way, you know. I know Mercola going mTOR block, mTOR forward. He does like 4 days block, 3 days forward.
Okay, yeah, so recommend cycling.
Yeah, definitely cycling. As you get older, it's more important. That's why Walter Longo, you know, all he did was caloric restriction for people. That's all he studied. But he saw as they got over 65, you know, they're losing too much muscle mass, and then they had to eat more, and then they had to put more protein on.
Okay. What is the best way to support membrane health?
Membrane health. Okay, so new product we have coming out is called Membrane Men. So that's phosphatidylcholine, astaxanthin, and tocotrienols. And so we blended in the phosphatidylcholine. We did phosphatidylcholine, those are, you know, sunflower based, so they're mostly omega-6. We put ahi flour as an omega-3 blend in it. So those are your lipids for the membranes, and then your antioxidants for the membranes are the astaxanthin and the tocotrienols. So you're always going to need some of the high-grade carotenoids in the membranes, but then PC is your main driver. Now, I like a little real high-grade PC. Never use raw soy lecithin. You got way too many soy chemicals in there. You could use raw sunflower, but using the pure ones is better.
Is it possible to have too much NAD in the cell? Like,
well,
supplement too much?
Well, all right. You know, here's where you get into some of the controversy. You know, high NAD in cancer cells use a lot of NAD, and so if you're in an acute cancer phase and you're fighting cancer, I would not be supplementing with NAD. I would be, you know, clearing, doing AMPK activation and whatever mix of therapies you're going to do. But then when you're out of that and in the recovery phase, then I'd build it back up. Are you going to get too much? I would just keep it cycling. As long as you're balancing it with methylation, you're going to be cycling it out. And I think too much is too much relative to methylation. So what do I take? I take 100 milligrams a day of the liposomal NMN, the NAD Gold. So that's 4 pumps. And I take 2 pumps a day of the methyl charge. And I've been doing that for about 2 years. It's only once in a while if I'm exposed to stuff that's winding up my mast cells. You know, some during all the smoke recently, mold exposures. If I've been going out too late at night with my drinking buddies, then I'm going to bring up the methyl. I will increase the methylation. But otherwise, that 4 to 2 has been a smooth sail for 2 years.
Okay. For mycotoxins, this person was taking binders but developed spasms to the extent where they couldn't do mild exercise. They supplemented with magnesium and that helped a little bit, but wondering if that was a coincidence or if maybe there was something else going on.
Oh, no, it could, you know, binders are rough on the gut, and that's why we put a lot of the acacia gum in. When I was first testing these out with people in house, without the acacia gum, all that charcoal and zeolite, it kind of hurt. It was like it griped, you know, there's the old griping, and it bit. And we put in the acacia gum and that softened it out. So I'd encourage you to go for things like acacia gum, marshmallow root, slippery elm root, extra fiber with it. You just got to soften out what that binder is doing. But generally in mold, you know, more binder the better. But you know, if you're not thinking about how to calm the lining, and magnesium is definitely good, but you know, just alone it could be a little aggressive. So a blend of magnesium with those mucilaginous herbs is the best way to soften up that binding experience.
Okay, let's see. That's it. That covers it.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And is our moderator going to sign off?
Yes, we will. Thank you so much, Dr. Shade. Have a good night.
Okay, thank you.